Welcome to the Arabia Steamboat Museum. And if you don't know, this museum is in Kansas City, and it also happens to be where I work. So I give tours here all the time, and I notice that people get really excited about some of the obvious things, like the wheel and the mule and all of the beautiful dishes. But there are 5 artifacts that I notice that people walk by all the time and barely give a second glance. But to me, they're some of the most important and interesting artifacts that we have in the museum. So today, I'm taking you on a mini tour and showing you 5 things that you should definitely not miss if you come to the Arabia Steamboat Museum. All right, first on our do not miss tour is this beautiful hunk of metal, which is actually a whole other steamboat than the Steamboat Arabia. This is actually an artifact from the Missouri packet. Now, a lot of people walk by this, they think it's just part of the steamboat. They don't really understand what it is. But what it is, this is the engine and the boiler of an entirely different boat called the Missouri packet. Now, this is the first boat that the guys dug up. This artifact is so cool because this boat sank in 1820. Now, to put that into some perspective, okay, the very first commercially viable steamboat started running in about 1807, and steamboats didn't really hit the Missouri River until 1819, just 1 year before this one sunk. Now, this is pretty much all that's left of this boat, but the artifact in itself is very neat because this might be the oldest steamboat engine in existence anywhere in the world. Artifact number 2 is this teacup. Now, you can find this in what we call the treasure room, and it's with a set of dishes that you'll see scattered about the rest of the museum. Now, most of the things that we have in the museum were things that were never actually owned by anybody. They were cargo, they were headed out to be sold, they were parts of prepaid orders bought by general stores. This set, however, we do believe was a personal item, and we believe that because if you look closely at the rim of the teacup, it should have gold around that top rim, but it doesn't, which in itself is kind of neat. But what makes this even more special is what you can tell about the family that owned this teacup. Because if you're drinking out of a teacup and you are right-handed, you are naturally only going to wear the top off on one side. In order to have the gold rim worn off on both sides, someone in this family had to be left-handed, and we can learn all of that from one little cup. Number 3 is the pottery that's sitting on this table. It's kind of mixed in with all these beautiful dishes, and people are looking at those and kind of miss this little set of broken pottery on this little table in the middle. But let me tell you, this stuff is very neat. These things were thought to be personal items brought on the boat, probably family heirlooms, and our preservationists have looked at how they're made, what they're made of, the color, the style, all of those things, and think that some of this pottery dates back to as early as the year 1650, which means this stuff was 200 years old when it got on the boat. All right, artifact number 4 you're going to find in our textile preservation lab. So a lot of people don't realize that cotton actually just disintegrates in water. It dissolves, and so we don't have a lot of cotton left. Most of the clothing we have is wool. Along with that, the clothing that we have that's wool was sewed together with cotton thread, so all of these artifacts have to be put back together when we find them, and that's what we do here in this preservation lab. But on display in the back of the lab, you'll see some brown coats, and people always think that those coats are just the most beautiful, most expensive coats that could ever possibly be, but they're not. And that's what's neat about them, okay? So a lot of the clothing that we have nowadays that survived from the 1850s are things like wedding dresses and fancy clothes that people didn't wear very often and people preserved, and they were well made, and they weren't your normal everyday run-of-the-mill clothes for people that couldn't afford good clothes, right? But these coats are. We have about 30 of these coats, and even though they look lovely, they actually were very cheaply made. The fabric is really coarse. They had a plain cotton lining inside, which is of course gone now. And they had really cheap wooden buttons. So even though they look beautiful, they're very unique because we just don't have these things anymore, because these are things that would have been worn out and long gone before they were able to be passed on to family 100 years later. All right, and artifact number 5. This is maybe my favorite display in the whole museum, okay? People get really confused because this one is labeled the Arabia incident. And they think when they look at the map that this is when the boat hit the snag and when it started to go under, but that's actually not what happened at all. So in 1856, 3 months before the Arabia sunk, the boat was headed down the river and it was full of guns that were being snuck on board by the New England Immigrant Aid Society. These guns were headed out to Lawrence to be used against the pro-slavery people out in Kansas. Now, there was a guy riding with the guns that was supposed to be in charge of making sure they got to where they were going. He knew they were hidden in the boxes marked tools. This guy wrote a letter to his mother talking about how the guns were safe and the people didn't even suspect it and yada, 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 and then promptly dropped the letter on the deck where someone found it, handed it to the captain read it, they pulled over at Lexington, and pro-slavery people raided the boat and stole all of these rifles off the boat. It's a cool story, happened in the Arabia. I love it because it relates to so much of the rest of Kansas history. These rifles, you can trace back their serial numbers. They really were on the boat when that incident happened. Now, these are on loan to the museum. They're not part of the cargo that sunk. But a lot of people miss this display entirely and don't think about the fact that the Arabia was involved in history even before it sunk. So I have walked around this museum literally hundreds of times, and some days I still feel like I'm seeing new things there, which is part of what I love about the museum. This museum is like 1856 got frozen in time and in the mud, and it's just fantastic. So if you ever make your way to Kansas City, make sure you come down and see it. Say hello to me while you're down there, and just make sure you come somewhat soon. We are moving at some point this year, and if you want to see the original location, get there quick.